Chapter 11. The video call with Absol had ended hours ago, but Alexander could still hear his voice, calm and relentless in its clarity, looping in his head as if it had never truly disconnected. He sat alone in his house. The night had settled into that particular darkness where everything felt suspended, as though the world itself were waiting for a decision to be made. Absol had listened without interrupting when Alexander told him about Sarah, about the calf, about the photographs, about the project. She's dangerous, Absol had said finally, because she controlled information the way others controlled weapons, selectively, strategically, and always with intent. Alexander remembered how Absol had leaned back in his chair on the screen, fingers pressed together, eyes sharp despite the hour. Access like that is never incidental, he had said when Alexander mentioned that Sarah had seen Max. People don't just stumble into proximity with someone else's child. That sentence had lodged itself somewhere deep in Alexandra's chest. It made the photographs feel heavier in his pocket, as though they carried weight beyond paper and pixels. Absol had been clear about the law, painfully so. There were no illusions offered, no reassurances wrapped in technical loopholes. If Max were taken without legal authorization, it would be abduction under Kazakh law, under US law, under every international framework Alexander could name. There was no clever phrasing that could change that. The fact that Layla faced no consequences doesn't make it lawful, Absol had said. It only means the law chose not to see her. That too lingered, the idea that legality wasn't an absolute force but a selective one, shaped by nationality, influence, and institutional protection. Alexander had none of those. What stayed with him most, though, was not the legal explanation, but the shift in Absol's tone near the end of the call. The moment where the lawyer receded and the father emerged, quietly, cautiously. There are things that are clearly illegal, Absol had said, and things that are clearly lawful. And then there's a narrow space in between, where people act not because they are wrong, but because every legal door has already been shut. Absol hadn't encouraged him. That much was clear. He had drawn the line carefully, deliberately, repeating that he could not participate in anything illegal, could not advise Alexander to cross that boundary. But he also hadn't condemned the impulse behind it. As a lawyer, I can't cross that line, Absol had said, but as a father, I understand why someone might approach it. That was the sentence Alexander kept returning to. No, not because it gave permission, but because it acknowledged the truth of the dilemma without disguising it as morality. Absol had refused to make the choice for him, refused to simplify it into right and wrong. If she's connected to intelligence networks, Absol had warned, anything she takes from you won't stay contained. These people don't bargain once, they collect. That thought tightened Alexandra's throat now. Sarah hadn't asked for anything yet. That, Absol had said, was the most dangerous part. Vagueness was not mercy, it was preparation. It was how dependency was built, and yet she was the only one who had proof, the only one who had seen Max. The only one who spoke about him not as a case file or a jurisdictional issue, but as a living, breathing presence moving through airports and hotel corridors. Decide nothing until you know the full price, Absol had said near the end. Urgency is not inevitability. The call had ended shortly after that with a clear picture that whatever Alexander chose, the responsibility and the consequences would be his alone. Now, hours later, Alexander sat with that weight pressing down on him. Absol's words didn't offer him a way out, they didn't soothe him. They only sharpened the reality of what lay ahead. Sarah was not a savior, that much was clear too, but she might be a door. And Alexander was standing in front of it, knowing full well that once opened, it might never close again. The call came the next afternoon. Alexander was alone in his apartment, staring at a half-written block of code he hadn't touched in 20 minutes when his phone vibrated. The number was unfamiliar. He hesitated, then answered. Dr. Varen, Sarah's voice said smoothly. I was hoping you would pick up. His shoulders stiffened. How did you get this number? No tricks, she replied lightly. Your company is working with mine now. I assist one of the project leads. You know, access flows naturally in environments like that. He said nothing. How are you? She asked. You looked unsettled the other day. You showed me pictures of my son, Alexander replied flatly. What did you expect? A brief pause. He's doing well, she said. He had a fever last week. Nothing serious, but Layla was anxious. Alexander closed his eyes. She cut his hair, Sarah continued. Shorter than before, saw him complain. Stop, Alexander said sharply. You don't get to narrate his life to me. Her tone softened, not apologetic but deliberate. I thought you would want to know. Why? He demanded. Why do you keep reminding me of what I've lost? Because you're not supposed to forget, she replied. People make bad decisions when they forget what they're fighting for. He laughed bitterly. You're very good at this. I've had practice. Silence stretched between them for a few moments, tense and heavy. You're not doing this out of kindness, Alexander said at last, and you're not helping me because you care. No, Sarah agreed calmly. I'm helping because you're useful. There it is, he said. What do you want? She smiled, though he couldn't see it. He could hear it. I want to tell you, she said, but not like this. Why not? Because phones listen, she replied, and because this conversation changes everything. Alexandra's voice hardened. I'm done being led in circles. You're not, Sarah said gently. You're just afraid of where the circle ends. Another pause. Meet me, she continued. Tomorrow, same caf at 3. And then, he asked. Then, she said, you'll understand exactly what kind of choice you're facing. And if I don't like it, then you walk away, Sarah replied, and nothing changes. Alexander clenched his jaw. That's a lie. Yes, she admitted easily. But not the kind you think. The line went dead. Alexander stared at the phone long after the screen went dark. He already knew he would go. Because whatever Sarah was about to offer, it was closer to Max than anything else left to him. They met again. The caf sat beneath a glass atrium inside a mixed-use complex downtown, too public for violence, too anonymous for memory. Conversations overlapped in several languages while coffee machines hissed. It was a place where no one listened because everyone was speaking. Alexander arrived early. He chose a table with his back to the wall, habit more than caution, and ordered tea he barely touched. His pulse had not slowed since the message Sarah sent that morning. Same place, noon. I'll explain everything, everything. The word had sat in his chest like a threat. She arrived exactly on time, as if punctuality itself were a message. She wore something understate, neutral tones, tailored but forgettable. Consultant attire, nothing that demanded attention, which meant everything about her invited scrutiny. When she spotted him, she didn't smile, neither hesitated. She walked straight to the table and sat down across from him, as though they were resuming a conversation interrupted minutes ago, rather than days. Haven't slept in long, she said lightly. Alexander didn't respond. Sarah studied him for a moment, then exhaled. All right, she said, no pleasantries, that's fair. She reached into her bag, withdrew a thin tablet, and placed it on the table between them, but did not turn it on yet. You already know I can help you, she said. What you don't know is why. He leaned back slightly, eyes never leaving hers. Then start there, she nodded as if he had passed a test. I work for an intelligence consortium, she said. Not a single country, not officially. Think of it as an alignment of interests rather than allegiance. Alexandra's jaw tightened. You trade technology. Sarah tilted her head. We facilitate exchange. For power, he said. For survival, she corrected smoothly. Those two are often indistinguishable. She tapped the tablet, bringing it to life. The screen filled with images, not Max yet, but documents. Redacted slides, network diagrams, logos half-blurred, deliberately obscured. Western research is decades ahead in some domains, she continued. Quantum systems, entangled networks, large-scale AI. Governments talk about ethics while quietly funding weaponization. We simply remove the hypocrisy. Her gaze sharpened. That, she said softly, is a miracle. The word landed heavily between them. What, Lumiere? She didn't blink. The room seemed to narrow, the noise of the city outside dulling into something distant and unreal. So this was it. It was no glitch, not coincidence, not paranoia. The irregular patterns, the careful probing, the way Lumiere had been touched without ever being breached, it had been them all along. He felt a strange, hollow clarity settle in his chest that comes when the last doubt finally collapses. This wasn't about curiosity or research anymore. It was about ownership, about power. And suddenly, every step he had taken, from Kazakhstan to San Francisco, felt less like a series of disasters and more like a path that had been quietly hurting him here to this moment to her. You built a system that stores and transfers information without leaving a trace, she continued. No persistent logs or forensic footprint. Do you know what that means in our world? I know exactly what it means, Alexander said. That's why I built it the way I did, and that's why everyone wants it. His fingers curled slowly around the edge of the table. You tried to access it, he said. Sarah didn't deny it. You noticed, she said instead, almost admiringly. Most creators wouldn't have. You were observing, he said, watching for absence distortion. You weren't breaking in, you were listening. She smiled then, small but controlled. You learn quickly. It was you, he said, the pieces locking into place with sickening clarity. The pattern shifts, the symmetry probes. The clean failures, yes, and you failed, for now. Alexandra's mind raced, instinctively reaching for defenses the way it always did, with denial, with architecture, with exits. He could say Lumiere was theoretical, unfinished, a proof of concept that never stabilized beyond simulations. He could claim the entanglement lattice degraded under scale, that the clean transfers were a fluke he had never been able to reproduce. He could bury it under technical ambiguity. Even if something existed, he could insist it wasn't whole, not deployable, not reliable, not worth the risk they were imagining. He felt himself assembling the argument piece by piece, rehearsing how to fracture the truth just enough to make it useless. This was how he survived systems, by knowing how to starve them of certainty. Sarah's smile cut through the thought before it could fully form. It wasn't wide or cruel, just knowing. You're thinking of saying it's incomplete, she said calmly, as if finishing a sentence he had spoken aloud. That it works in fragments or that you never solved coherence at scale. She tilted her head, watching his face with unsettling patience. We know the architecture, Alexander. We know what you fixed after the failure. We know when you stopped publishing because the results were too clean. Her eyes held his, steady and unblinking. You can deny it exists, you can say it's broken, but we've already seen enough to know what it will become. His throat went dry, a quiet, involuntary reaction he couldn't control. There was no counter-argument ready, no clever redirection waiting behind his teeth. She hadn't guessed she had known, and in that moment a cold clarity washed over him. This wasn't about persuasion or leverage anymore, he had already been seen. The calf noise seemed to recede as though the space itself were holding its breath. You used Max, Alexander said quietly. Sarah's expression didn't change. No, I observed him. There's a difference. You took photos of my son, to prove credibility, to threaten me, to establish reality, she corrected. Legal systems thrive on denial, I don't. Alexander stood abruptly, chair scraping softly against the floor. You don't get to talk about legality, he said, voice tight. You operate outside every system that protects people. Sarah didn't rise, she didn't raise her voice. And where did those systems get you? She asked. That stopped him. She looked up at him, eyes steady. How many filings, how many hearings, how many polite dismissals? He sat back down slowly, the fight draining into something colder. That's what I thought, she said. She slid the tablet towards him and swiped. The screen changed. Max, a recent photo, too recent. Max sitting on a hotel bed, legs crossed, focused on a handheld game. Another, him at an airport gate, backpack slung over one shoulder, looking bored and restless in the way only children waiting can look. Alexandra's breath caught. He travels with her, Sarah said. Frequently, she doesn't trust leaving him behind. Why are you telling me this? Alexander asked hoarsely. Because that makes access easier, Sarah said, and because time matters. He looked up sharply. Access how? She leaned forward now, lowering her voice. I can arrange a meeting, she said. You see him, you speak to him, you remind him who you are, and then, Alexander asked, and then you leave with him. The words echoed violently in his head. You're talking about kidnapping, he said. I'm talking about extraction, she replied calmly. Governments do it every day. And if he doesn't come willingly, he will, she said. Children remember safety. Alexandra's hands shook, he clenched them together, and in return, he asked, there it was. Sarah leaned back, satisfied. In return, she said, you give us access to Lumiere's core. No, he said immediately. She smiled. Let me finish. You don't get, I won't. You give us a controlled interface, she continued, a version you design, a conduit we can't fully reverse engineer without you. He stared at her. You want me permanently embedded. Yes, you want me to work for as long as Lumiere evolves, she said, which, given your mind, could be decades. You're asking me to betray my country, she shrugged lightly. You don't even live in the same legal reality as your passport anymore. That's not. You've already crossed lines, she pressed gently. You built something governments explicitly asked you not to. I built something to protect information. And we want it to protect us, she said, from surveillance, from domination, from imbalance, from accountability, he said, from annihilation, she replied, eyes hardening. You think this is about profit, this is about who controls the future when borders no longer matter. Alexander laughed once bitter. You'll weaponize it. Everything becomes a weapon eventually, she said. The question is who holds it, and if I refuse, he asked. Sarah didn't answer immediately. She reached for her cup, took a measured sip, then set it down. Then the legal system continues to fail you, she said. Layla continues to move freely. Max grows up calling another man his primary parent, and Lumiere will still be hunted, just less politely. You'll try again, he said. Yes, and you'll succeed eventually. Someone will. Alexander closed his eyes. In his mind he saw Max's face, heard his laugh, felt the small weight of his hand in his. You'd own me, he said. No, Sarah said softly, we'd need you, for life, for relevance, she corrected. You would be protected, funded, you will become untouchable, and watched. She didn't deny that. You'd never let me walk away, he said. Why would you want to? She asked gently. You would have your son. The cruelty of that landed with surgical precision. Alexander opened his eyes slowly. You have been spying on my life. Alexander finally said it out loud, his voice a little loud. He told her how it felt to realize he had been watched this entire time, his movements tracked, his work probed, his desperation measured and catalogued. He didn't accuse her outright, but the weight of it sat in every word, that his fight for his son had been treated like leverage, that his privacy had been dissolved under the excuse of legality. He said it felt less like investigation and more like violation, as if his life had been entered without permission and rearranged for someone else's purpose. When he finished, he held her gaze, making it clear that whatever deal she was offering, it had already crossed a line he would never forget. We observe momentum, she said. You accelerated, and now you offer me the key, he said, at the cost of everything else. She met his gaze, at the cost of illusion. He leaned back, staring at the ceiling, feeling the fracture widen inside him. How long do I have? He asked. Sarah stood, gathering her things. Not long, she said. Pressure increases daily, others are circling. She paused, then added quietly, You built something beautiful, Alexander. Don't let it fall into hands that won't give you anything back. She slid a small card onto the table. No numbers, no names, she said. You know how to reach me. Sarah leaned back slightly, as if weighing how much truth to offer, then spoke carefully. Rees Remen is not just a senior consultant or a man who signs off on projects, she said. That's the costume. He hides behind frameworks, deliverables, and strategy decks the same way others hide behind flags or courts. People like him don't need to shout power. They let systems do it for them. Her gaze sharpened. If he wanted to ruin someone quietly, he could. If he wanted to elevate someone just as silently, that too. And no one would ever be able to point to the moment it happened. She paused, then added, almost gently, Men like him don't operate outside the law. They operate above its friction. Alexandra's jaw tightened. So this was planned, he said. Your arrival, his visit, the project. You walking into my company like it was coincidence. He searched her face for denial. Sarah only smiled, almost amused. Planned is such an emotional word, she replied. Let's say anticipated. Your work didn't appear in a vacuum, Alexander. People noticed long before you did. She leaned forward now, her voice dropping. What you're experiencing, this pressure, this reach, is nothing to us. This is usual, normal. Then, as if sensing his next fear, she added smoothly, and your executives. You're bored, they won't know a thing. To them this will look like progress, opportunity. Her eyes met his, confident and relentless. Trust us. We're very good at making things disappear, questions most of all. Alexandra's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping as something older and heavier settled in his chest. You're asking me to cross a line that doesn't uncross, he said, not only legally but morally. He leaned back, staring past her for a moment as if contemplating. I grew up believing there were things you don't trade, not for money, comfort, even for survival. You're talking about handing over work that was funded, protected, and trusted under the assumption that it would never be used this way. His voice lowered. You're asking me to betray a country that gave me the freedom to build this at all. He looked back at her then, eyes dark, conflicted. And the worst part is that you're not even pretending it's noble. You're not dressing it up fancily. You're calling it power, clean and outright. He exhaled sharply. If I do this, I don't just lose my name in one place, I lose it everywhere. I become someone who can never say he didn't know what he was doing. His hands clenched in his lap. I already feel hunted. This would mean choosing to become something worse. Sarah listened without interrupting, her expression unreadable. When he finished, she stood, smoothing the sleeve of her coat with unhurried precision. Then don't, she said simply. You're right, it is a line. And lines are only crossed by people who decide the cost on the other side is higher. She met his gaze one last time, calm, almost gentle. You have a choice, Alexander. I've never said otherwise. She took a step back, already disengaging. Think about it, she added, turning away, about what loyalty really protects and what it doesn't. Then she walked away, disappearing into the crowd as seamlessly as she had arrived. Alexander sat there long after she was gone. His tea had gone cold. His hands were steady now, not because he felt calm, but because something inside him had hardened into resolve or despair. He couldn't yet tell which, he knew only this. Lumir was no longer just a creation. It was a bargaining chip, and his son was the price.